Everyone in North America. We have Canadians watching tonight, and of course, lots and lots of new people are joining us. So this is the Sharia Crime Stoppers weekly news analysis program. Tonight, of course, we've got Leo Hohmann. Leo, welcome. It's great to have you cycle through on the third Monday. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Happy to be here.
And ladies and gentlemen, let me just mention to you that we are hitting a nerve here between our three news analyst programs. We have been hitting a nerve. Lots of new people tonight. Those of you that are on Zoom, remember, if you're new, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You click on that during the presentation. You type in your question. We field it, and at the end, we will bring it forward. Mary, I will be bringing the questions forward to Leo and his guest. Leo, I think we can go ahead and mention your guest tonight is Shahram Hadian.
Yes, Shahram will be joining me a little bit later in the program, and we will welcome him as soon as he's able to be with us. He is now in Tennessee and getting accommodations there. He's had a very busy day, but he is going to join us as soon as possible. Want to touch, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, on the big news of the day, which is this bombshell case, breaking news out of New Jersey, in which a federal judge, Esther Salas, she was assigned just 4 days prior to when this big event happened yesterday, the case involving a Deutsche Bank class action lawsuit, in which the investors in Deutsche Bank are suing the company because, and you may say, why is this big news? Sounds a little bit mundane. Well, no, Deutsche Bank was heavily involved with Jeffrey Epstein, the accused serial rapist of children. And Deutsche Bank was apparently one of the primary conduits through which he funneled his money, allegedly money laundering. And so this judge was going to hear the case. She was just assigned it last Thursday, I believe. And then on Sunday, a man disguised as a FedEx delivery driver walks up to her house Sunday afternoon. Her son opens the door and the guy shoots him dead, puts a bullet in his chest, then shoots Judge Salas's husband, and he's in critical condition. Judge Salas was not injured, but was at home at the time. This is definitely a big story and something to keep an eye on, because I think this whole Jeffrey Epstein case is a wild card issue in the upcoming presidential election. Not only is President Trump an anti-globalist, which we know he's hated by the establishment for that, for his stance on things like closing the borders, bringing the factories and the jobs back to America from China and other countries, which means potentially what? Lower profits for the billionaire investor class. That's why they hate him, folks. Let's be clear. Everything in the end usually has to do with money. But now President Trump is making some very loud and public statements about this global pedophilia ring. And there's some very big names, powerful people who have been mentioned, such as Bill Gates, John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, the Clintons, Oprah, at least one member of the British royal family, Prince Andrew, has been fingered and named in this. It involves not just Democrats, but Republicans as well. And then Trump came out with this statement in early July. He said at least 800,000 children every year are reported missing, and many are abducted. They put tape over their mouths, they're shuttled away, and they're never seen again. They end up, folks, being sold for sex. Many end up being tortured and killed. Trump said all of this. So that is just, in my opinion, the final straw for the elites, the global elites in the world, not just in America, who are involved in this. They cannot allow Trump to be reelected. It will be devastating for them. And I'm going to lay out just briefly some of the things that have happened. On June 20th, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman, was fired by AG Bill Barr after he was asked to resign and refused. That's very unusual, folks, for someone in a position like that, a U.S. attorney, to be asked to resign and to refuse and say, I'm staying on the job. Well, okay, you're fired. Less than 2 weeks later, on July the 2nd, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's partner, who was arrested by federal agents on charges of recruiting, grooming, and participating in the abuse of young girls, whom after she recruited and groomed, she would hand off to allegedly Mr. Epstein. So now the federal judge assigned to the case in the money laundering involving Deutsche Bank, which was involved with Epstein, the judge assigned to that case is sent a very loud and clear message. Her son is killed. Her husband is critically wounded. The guy who shoots them, he did this yesterday. Today we get the news that he has committed what? Suicide. It just gets more bizarre by the day. And so this is just something that I see as an act of desperation by the deep state and the people involved in this. You don't go off like this unless you are really worried. Bill Barr must be getting close in his investigation, close to the heart of this criminal enterprise, and hopefully breaking it up. This has been going on for decades. Capturing and selling children. This is huge. Things are happening in the natural and the spirit world right now in the battle between good and evil. And this is really hard to put into words, just how evil this is. I myself, a year ago, if you'd asked me about Pizzagate, I would have said, nah, let's not go there. I don't think that's true. Now I'm starting to think it's true. You think about all that's happened on this case over the last year, has really been stunning. Dick, did you want to weigh in on this as far as how it affects the president in the upcoming election?
Thank you, Leo. Well, before we do that, Leo, why don't you say a few things about Pizzagate? I know our people are very, very much on top of things, but it's certainly possible some people don't know what Pizzagate actually is.
It is part of this alleged international child sex ring. And it all started with emails that were hacked into from John Podesta's email server. And there was a lot of coded language, and a lot of people said that these different orders for pizza and whatnot were code words for ordering up children by these millionaires and billionaires. And Epstein, as you know, had this island referred to as Orgy Island, where the Clintons are known to have appeared there. Bill Gates is known to have appeared there, I believe. Many, Prince Andrew and many of these others have been on this island while Epstein was in the throes of doing this. And nobody even knows really where Epstein got all of his money from. And that's part of this case involving Deutsche Bank. Epstein is a multi-billionaire. He owned the largest flat in Manhattan. And think about all the rich billionaires who live in Manhattan. And a lot of stuff went on at his Manhattan apartment, and a lot of stuff went on this island and other places. He has multiple locations. And this is what it has to do with.
Well, I'm not sure it's directly connected, but there have been some articles related to what are called black files, things that politicians keep track of to potentially blackmail other people. And there was an association of a potential collection of blackmailable information that maybe Barack left the office with. So who knows, but it's certainly the case. When you start to look at, you read about Pizzagate, and I advise people to take their own research and do it, you'll get a feeling for how this might be true, how it might be very, very widespread, et cetera. I guess the point here is, as we watch this crazy world in 2020 happen, it's certainly possible that something more and more, well, I'll just mention, there's a problem with perversion in general. We have two other groups that deal with child perversion. unfortunately, the Roman Catholic Church has not fixed their problem. As you may know, the current Pope reinstated the head of the gay priests and pedophilia ring named Cardinal McCarran. We've had that conversation with Liz Ure on this program.
Yeah, Theodore McCarrick.
Theodore McCarrick, right. And Theodore and unfortunately a significant group of people in the Catholic Church have a pedophilia problem. The other big group that has a pedophilia problem would be, of course, the people that practice Sharia. It's acceptable for grown men, older men to marry very, very young girls. It's even permissible to marry them and participate in, let's just say, unusual sexual activity even before there's actually a consummation of that with a 9-year-old per Hohmann. So we do have a problem with sexual perversion. And to the extent that it turns out, if in fact it turns out that a large group of the people who are considered elitists, either financially or professors or people who influence people, if there's a large collection of elite leadership who want to run the country, who want to take over the country, and in some way they can be associated with incremental sexual immorality with children, who knows how that might affect people's thinking. They may or may not be concerned about the kind of stuff we normally talk about, but the grossness of sexual perversion with children could get to the point where it becomes a critical issue. That's my only comment.
Absolutely. And just to follow up briefly on Theodore McCarrick, this is a guy who was forcibly retired by the previous Pope, Benedict.
Exactly.
Because of all of the allegations that were swirling around him before he was charged with anything. And this is also a man, Theodore McCarrick, who was a globalist diplomat. He was assigned different diplomatic initiatives by the Vatican. He was heavily involved with China and negotiating that absurd deal that the Pope put forth with China back in 2000, I think it was 13 or 14, where the Pope basically sold out the Catholic house church movement of China and threw his lot in with the official government approved church, and allows the Communist Party now to approve all bishop assignments in China. McCarrick was involved with that. McCarrick was also heavily involved in the global interfaith movement, where he would hobnob around the country, around the world, and visit with various Islamic dictators and push for interfaith negotiations, basically selling out church doctrine and compromising it. So this guy was a real devil, and the previous Pope sidelined him. The new Pope Francis comes in 2013, I believe it was, and resurrects McCarrick's career. Quite astonishing. That tells you where Pope Francis stands on this.
Well,
and so anyway, let's move on a little bit to the next topic, which is my article that I published just last night on my website, leohohmann.com. I really think it's one of the more important articles for people to read that I've come out with in the last month or two. It's titled Forced Masking of America is Paving the Way for Bill Gates' Final Solution. And there's a lot of territory covered in this article. It's really tying together the mask issue and the way that has gained unbelievable traction over the last 2 or 3 weeks with the vaccine issue. And if you want to understand what's going on with the masks and the vaccines, I really encourage you to read this article. It's not just the government, folks, that is putting the pressure on. Yes, it is the government in many states. We're seeing even conservative states like Texas putting conservative governors, supposedly, like Governor Abbott of Texas, putting forth forced masking edicts on their people. But it goes beyond that. And Georgia, where I am, is a good example. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp has resisted incredible pressure to come out with a similar edict and force the masking issue. However, so we have no law and no executive order here in Georgia requiring face masks in public. But I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, as a resident of this state, it is becoming almost impossible to buy food, go to a doctor's appointment, a dentist appointment, even a veterinary appointment without having to wear a mask. Where is this coming from? Because it's not coming from the state. And our governor is even suing the cities that have put in forced masking laws. The city of Atlanta, Athens, and Savannah, and I think several others have tried to do it at the city level. And he's suing them and saying, hey, you can't, these mask laws in these cities are unenforceable because they do not jibe with the state law. So I did a little investigating. I talked to people in the grocery store industry, medical folks. What's going on is the left is highly mobilized and highly organized with phone calling campaigns, email campaigns, personal confrontations with people, with store managers in grocery stores, complaining, whining, threatening, intimidating. We will boycott you, we will sue you, whatever they have to do and say to get stores to put up a sign on their door that says no mask, no service. And another important point, this is a real important point that I'm afraid some people might miss in the article, but I want you to pay attention to this when you go over it, is that in a technocratic society, which right now the most advanced technocratic state in the world is China. If you want to know what a technocracy looks like, look at communist China. Yes, it has Marxists, but even more than Marxist, the leaders of China are technocrats. A technocratic society puts a value on every human life, a numerical value. How much do you produce? What are you capable of producing? How much do you consume? So it is monetary, but it's not only monetary, it even goes into your social scoring. Yes, Chinese citizens are even evaluated on how agreeable they are with government dictates. Do they fall in line when the propaganda of the day says to wear a mask? Or do they resist? Do they try to meet in large church groups when they're told not to? Do they communicate with unauthorized or irreputable members of society? All these are things that could bring down your social score. So in other words, the technocrat is not only interested in what you can produce and how much resources you consume, but what are your attitudes, values, and beliefs? Folks, this is where we're heading in America. This was the sole purpose of Common Core a few years back. One of the primary purposes of Common Core, as you may recall, was the incessant testing of students. And many of the tests did not involve or have anything to do with academic knowledge. That the education technocrats wanted to know, where does the child stand in terms of different topics? What types of messaging are they getting from their home? And so the same thing with Obamacare. There were many reasons for Obamacare, but one of the primary reasons was to open up your financial records to the government. The government can now slide in there between you and your doctor and get the doctor on their team, so to speak, not necessarily just on your team. That used to be a very private relationship between you and your doctor. That's why you now have your doctor asking you prying questions questions that would have been considered unprofessional or inappropriate just 10 years ago. Do you have any guns in your house? Do you do what, types of things are going on in your home that might cause you stress, and they go into areas that might not seem appropriate? All sorts of personal information, personally identifiable information compromised. Your rights of privacy are completely gone in a technocracy. Well, it's the same thing with the masks. Masks are in right now. Everyone in the media is pushing them, pushing the mask. Every company is adopting a mask requirement policy. So now, as a technocrat, we want to know what percentage of the public is refusing to conform to this new normal of having to cover your face in public, right? And we're now going to bring unbelievable pressure to bear on those who refuse to conform. They will literally demonize us if we do not wear the mask. And a good example of this, folks, was an article that came out today on Yahoo News. Yahoo News article. Can we get that up? Encouraging mask wearers to confront those who don't wear the mask in public and bully them into submission. If polite conversation doesn't work, lash out at them, cuss them out. Let's just go through this article from the top here. Roughly 2/3 of Americans say they wear masks in public. Unfortunately, that still leaves a substantial portion of potential COVID-19 carriers unmasked. Coming across anyone flouting public health recommendations and putting you, your family, and your community at risk, listen to this loaded language, folks, triggers a number of thoughts and feelings. Depending on the situation, your annoyance could range from a mild simmer to an all-out roiling boil. So what do you do? First off, your indignation at that Target shopper in front of you, in line without so much as a handkerchief around their neck, is warranted. So you're justified in having just a rage building up in you against this person. Wearing a mask is crucial, they say. The medical community, including White House health advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci, has said in as many ways as possible that Americans who aren't wearing face masks are increasing the risk of spreading the virus. Well, let's see. Dr. Fauci changed his mind 3 times on that. He originally said, don't wear masks. They're not needed. They won't help you. That was back in March. I believe it was early March. Then he switched to, well, they don't really help you, but it is a good symbol. So we should all wear masks if possible out in public. And then he most recently, a couple of weeks ago, when all this mask shaming started coming to bear, he comes out and says, masks are absolutely crucial. So we're supposed to believe this guy who changes his mind by the week. So we skip down and it says, of course, there's no way to know exactly which type of non-face mask wearer you're dealing with, and there are ways to approach a situation delicately before your anger boils over. So before you form a posse of fellow shoppers to shame them, consider alternatives to confrontation. Start slow and escalate as needed, following these live steps. And by the way, when they talk about the different reasons someone might not wear a mask, and you can see the cuss words they use up there, I'm not going to repeat because we have a family audience here. They do not mention that some people medically cannot wear a mask due to physical ailments, asthma wearers, and COPD sufferers, and even psychological wounds, like women who've been raped, I've been told, have a visceral psychological phobia to seeing someone with a mask, because some of them, were suffocated or partially suffocated. They had a tape put around their mouth while they were raped, and it brings back all of these horrific psychological manifestations when they walk around and see people with their face covered like this. But they don't care about those people in this article. And so it says, before you form this posse, consider, a polite confrontation. Start slow, escalate as needed. When you find yourself, stage one, when your anger is at this level, your best option in most scenarios is to let it go, as long as you're not willfully putting anyone else in danger. And as annoying as it may be to have to walk away, your gut is telling you this is not worth a fight. Listen to your gut. Stage two, pretty annoyed. You're ticked off. Your anger is heightened by a justifiable fear for your family and community. Still, the risk of getting COVID from this person is unlikely, and getting close enough to exchange words is a surefire way you can increase your chances of exposure. Get away if possible. Stage three, growing anger. This is the level where not saying something bears a greater risk than saying something. Say at your kid's birthday party. Obviously, knowing the person not wearing a face mask or knowing someone there who does makes engaging them far less fraught, but it should still be done considerately. Initiate any conversation with someone not wearing a mask as just that, a conversation, instead of instructing them to wear a face mask, or else get curious. And then it says you could do this, that, or the other. Stage four. This is where they really get out. They say, are you effing kidding me? This is when you're really pissed. You've got to say something. While Chu doesn't recommend confronting strangers about face mask wearing in public, he does suggest that a similar conversation could happen in, say, a Walmart checkout line, provided it begin with unrelated chit chat, the weather, a deal on cereal, etc. If after 2 to 3 back and forths you can tell the person is not aggressive, in other words, not a conservative who might be armed, concealed carry, if they seem friendly and welcoming, you could bring it up with the motivational interview, which says, but if they're not interested in a conversation, I wouldn't mention it. Stage five, this is where they really bring it on hard and say, basically just lay into the person, approach them and hit a wall. If you approach them and hit a wall of willful ignorance or downright anger, get help. If you're in a store, inform customer service. The on-site manager or another employee should enforce the business's rules, a la no shirt, no shoes, no service. As much legal right as if a person is blatantly putting others at risk, you've tried the above tactics and you're not in a business setting and want to get a message across, go for it. Let loose a salvo of swear words. Sometimes you just need to yell. Okie dokie. Wow. Very, very disturbing article there by Yahoo News, which is basically giving a dog whistle for some wacko liberals to launch, in my opinion, physical attacks against people who don't wear masks. There was also an article by law.com this week in which the New York Bar Association came out and advocated forced vaccines. That is another thing we will take up in a little bit. But one other thing quickly on the mask. Sorry, I didn't want to bring that up quite yet, Dick. And this is one other thing that was addressed in my article. The N95 mask, which, as you know, is a certified mask that allows a lot less in than the cloth masks. Well, I happen to have a packet of 3 N95 masks in my garage that I had bought a couple of years ago. And I was told that there was a warning in there that you should not wear this mask if you think it's going to stop you from getting sick. I opened it up, I looked at the literature, scroll down here under warnings, number it 2. There it is. This respirator does not protect against the risk of contracting disease or infection, which of course would include viral infection and COVID-19. So if an N95 certified mask does not stop you from being infected with COVID-19. What do you think about all of these cloth masks that the majority of folks seem to be wearing? I hope it makes them feel good, maybe more protected, or whatever it is. Maybe some of it is just wanting to get along to go along, but it's not doing anything to protect their health. Mary, did you also want to weigh in on some mask wearing rules before we switch to our next topic of vaccines?
Sure, and actually we've gotten a question on some thoughts on from one of our attendees in terms of what we think about the wearing of the mask. But yeah, some things that I looked at recently are the Mayo Clinic put out a list of things. Basically, they say the healthcare providers must be trained and pass a fit test to confirm a proper seal before using the N95 respirator, listen to this, not just mask, in the workplace. So think about that. How many people are trained to put a mask on to make it effective for what they're trying to accomplish? Now, this Mayo Clinic article talked about what you should be doing if you are wearing a mask, right? So let me read just a few of these to you, because this is, you know, when I looked at this, and Leo, you and I have talked about this. I know the mayors in Georgia here are trying to mandate, and I think there's 3 mayors I've heard now are trying to mandate wearing a mask over the governor's ruling. But listen to this. It says, wash or sanitize your hands before and after putting on and taking off your mask. Nobody does that, right? Place your mask over your mouth and nose. How many times have you seen it worn down here? Tie it behind your head or use ear loops and make sure it's snug. Don't touch your mask while wearing it. Yeah, that doesn't ever happen. If you accidentally touch your mask, wash or sanitize your hands. How many people know this stuff? If your mask becomes wet or dirty, switch to a clean one. Put the used mask in a sealable bag until you can wash it.
Right, because it's contaminated with a deadly virus, right? I see these things tossed out all over the place. You see them on the parking lot, laying on the parking lot at the grocery store. Yeah.
Thrown in your car while until you go out again. Yeah, absolutely. Remove the mask by untying it or lifting off the ear loops without touching the front of the mask or your face. Wash your hands immediately after removing your mask. Oh, regularly wash your mask with soap and water by hand or in the washing machine. Whew, man, don't put masks on anyone who has trouble breathing. No kidding, really? So this is from the Mayo Clinic, and I actually wrote to one mayor and I said, how many people follow these rules and regulations? And the other thing that was brought to my attention this weekend, and I'm going to try and pull this up if I'm successful here. This is the interesting part too. 2 ladies that did a video of and talked about this U.S. Department of Labor Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, 1910.134 App C. Now, when you look at this, it talks about a personal protective equipment, the PPEs we all hear about. Well, it also talks about the OSHA respirator. Didn't I just read you that Mayo Clinic called the N95 mask a respirator?
Yes.
Here's look at this. Questionnaire that is mandatory, and a medical evaluation questionnaire that is mandatory to use it. Look at this list. You go through here and you've got to fill out, and this is obviously for employers, but think about this in terms of the personal level as well. Anybody wearing a mask. So it goes through an entire who you are, how tall you are, what your weight is, and what your job title is. But then it goes through all these mandatory questions. Have you ever had any of the following conditions? Seizures, diabetes, allergic reactions, claustrophobia, trouble smelling odors. I'm not going to read them all. It's crazy. Emphysema, pneumonia, tuberculosis. You've got to go through. This is mandatory questions to wear it. Shortness of breath. It goes on. Let's see. Down here, swelling in your legs, heart arrhythmia, high blood pressure, any heart problems. This is huge. Look at this list. If you've used a respirator, have you ever had any of the following problems? Eye irritation, skin allergies, anxiety, great weakness or fatigue. How many people you talk to have headaches and go
Yes.
through trying to breathe through these masks, and it's just horrific what
And I'm
people are setting
told that
their skin.
they can also cause, if prolonged regular use of face masks can also, because it depletes the oxygen intake, you are susceptible to a fungus growing in your lungs,
Right.
an actual fungal infection.
This is a mandatory list by OSHA for anybody in the workplace wearing a mask. This is incredible. So if you think about it, nobody's filling it out. Nobody's understanding the criterion. So are we safer? No. I'm going to say no.
And since some of these symptoms, Mary, actually mimic the symptoms of COVID-19,
That's right.
I'm wondering how many young people are working 8-10 hours a day at their job wearing a mask. They're getting a fungal infection. They now have a fever. They now have shortness of breath. They now have a cough. So they go, they get tested, and are going to be told that they have COVID. I'm sorry, but there's so much hanky-panky going on with this testing. I'm getting people every day reporting strange, bizarre things where they were not, some of them were tested or went in to get the test and then decided not to take it, and they're getting test results delivered to their house. They never even were tested.
Right.
They
Right.
checked into the clinic to get tested. They changed their mind. They went home. I guess they filled out the paperwork or whatever, but they changed their mind and went home, and they're getting a test result delivered to them saying, you have COVID.
It's kind of like the dead cat voting, right?
Yes, exactly. So there, it's just massive fraud.
Right.
And so let's just switch sort of to the second rung of this two-pronged article on masks and vaccines. The vaccines, as I explain in my article, is the real reason for the doubling down on masks into what is really a Nazi-like atmosphere, complete with incessant news propaganda coming across the airwaves, the TVs, the radio, the newspapers, telling us how we must wear our masks, to the snitch lines set up in many cities and states, encouraging people to turn in their neighbors for not wearing a mask in public. Call this line 24/7. To the public shaming and humiliation, even as we saw above from Yahoo News, to outright verbal abuse, which comes awful close to encouraging physical attacks. I can easily see where some people would read that article and say, these are low-life scumbags trying to kill everyone. So why not take them out? Why not punch them in the face? You know, this is unbelievable. And then we had the New York Bar Association coming out and saying that they're in favor of the state forcing vaccines on people, regardless of objections on religious or philosophical grounds. And I did a little digging and found that most states, including Georgia, including Florida, including Arizona, I haven't had time to check all the states yet, but I found at least three red states. So I'm guessing that most blue states also have it. If red states this is a law that gives the governor the authority under the emergency declaration law to make vaccines mandatory. If you look up Georgia's law that gives the governor the authority to declare a health emergency, and you go, it lists all the things that he can make you do. He can make you self-quarantine. He can make you stay home from work. He can make you do the contact tracing, you know, and give all your contacts. at the very last thing in the long list is he can make you submit to a vaccine. The only redeeming thing in the law is that it does give us, at least in Georgia, I haven't read to this level of detail the other states, but in Georgia, you do at least have the right to legal recourse. So you can file suit in Superior Court and challenge the governor's subpoena for you to get a vaccination against your will. But an action item for everybody after this would be to check their emergency health declaration law. This is the law that gives your governor the right to declare an emergency and do certain things that he wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. Look up that law in your state and find out if he has the right to force people to get vaccines. He does in Florida, he does in Georgia, he does in Arizona. Some of the points apply to masks and vaccines. Okay, asymptomatic carriers. These are the dreaded invisible carriers. This is something that you should brush up on, because this mask issue that we've seen coming to the forefront is going to, the vaccines are going to follow a similar pattern. They're going to try the carrot first and eventually go with the stick. They're going to try to cajole you into getting the vaccine before they try to intimidate you. That's just the natural course of the way government works. We've seen it with the masks, and it will follow that same pattern with the vaccine. And one of the things that they will use against us is this notion of the asymptomatic carriers. Those folks walking around who don't have any symptoms, okay? That's what they say, why we need to all be wearing masks. Because even though you think you're healthy, you could what? You could be a asymptomatic carrier, meaning you don't have any symptoms, but you have COVID. One thing that you need to be ready to put forth an explanation for is when someone hits you with the idea of you being asymptomatic possibly, and that's why you need a mask, or that's why you need a vaccine, please, I would say, explain to me how I am at risk of infecting you if I am asymptomatic. This virus is spread through droplets, which are spread through coughing and sneezing, or maybe being close to someone and shouting and spitting in their face. That's how you spread this virus. So how am I going to infect you if I don't interact with you in a very, very close quarters and I'm not coughing and sneezing? They cannot answer that question because the science is not on their side. Even the World Health Organization, UN, WHO, chief epidemiologist admitted this a couple of months ago. Why? Because she knew the science. She said it was virtually impossible for asymptomatic carriers to spread the disease. But she apparently had not been updated on the propaganda talking points and spoke out of school. She spoke the truth. And then the very next day, we see her walk it back. She was notified, you're not supposed to be telling people that. And so we had a scientist who knew the science and spoke, I guess with a Freudian slip, something she was not supposed to be speaking about, and she had to walk it back. I thought that was very revealing. So people cannot explain scientifically how asymptomatic carriers are going to be the super spreaders. They've actually, the media and the fake scientists like Dr. Fauci and these folks have called the asymptomatic folks the super spreaders. And that's what they've used to spread super fear among the people. The idea of these invisible, walking, healthy looking carriers. It's frightening if you believe it. Too bad it's not true. Okay, moving on a little bit, I want to share with you something I have not published, I have not put in print. I may not put in print because it's very sensitive information and I don't want to get the source in trouble. If I do put it in print, it'll be a way that protects him. But I spoke this last week with a high-level federal Homeland Security agent who has a top-level security clearance. This agent informed me that diversity is still of the highest priority within all federal law enforcement agencies. That would include DOJ, that would include DHS, and that would, of course, include the FBI, which he said is actually the worst for making hiring decisions based solely on the color of one's skin or the sexual preference of the applicant. He said that this started under Obama, where you had to, Obama was very clever in changing out these personnel, the personnel at the FBI, the DOJ, and the DHS. I actually talked about this in my book, Stealth Invasion. I believe it's page 74, where I quoted Cecilia Muñez, who was a domestic policy aide to President Obama. And she held a live news conference, which I live streamed. And she said in this press conference that her top priority in this job, this post that she held under President Obama, was to institutionalize Obama's policies and get them embedded within the DNA of every federal agency so that Obama's policies would live on long after he was gone from the White House. And it was just, so I knew this was true already, but it was just chilling to hear this veteran federal agent tell me how every single position that gets turned over is filled on the basis of the color of one's skin. And they're basically have to be, under Obama, they had to be Democrat, black, brown, or gay, he said. It's still going on under Trump because these hiring officers are still in place. And it's a long story how you get to the position of where you do the hiring, but they're not easily fired. And many of these folks are just utterly incompetent. He said he's aware of many people who've been on the job 5, 6, 7 years in the FBI who don't have a single arrest under their belt. And then he went on to tell me that even the Trump-appointed U.S. attorneys are reticent to go after certain off-limit targets, such as Islamic targets, corrupt Democratic politicians, which could involve some of this pedophilia ring that we talked about earlier. Why are they not aggressively prosecuting these criminals, Islamic terrorists, and the like? I asked him. He told me that they fear they will be blackballed in their post-government careers. Let that sink in for a minute. You've got a Republican, Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who's afraid to aggressively go after certain targets because he's keeping an eye on his post-government career opportunities. And he doesn't want to be blackballed, meaning he won't be hired in the private sector if he's too much of an obvious Trump supporter, a hardline Trump supporter who, you know, went after illegal aliens and, Islamic terrorists and the like. So it really is a problem, folks, and something we need to be concerned about. And with this, I do want to bring in Shahram to let him explain to us what has been going on in Tennessee and Virginia with his latest efforts there to organize people at the grassroots level to form, well, I'm just going to let Shahram explain it because I don't want to use the wrong words. Shahram, let's bring you in on the conversation.
Thank you, Leo. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Very good. Well, hey, thanks for what you were sharing. That was really powerful. And let me go this way here on the speaker. really powerful. Sorry that I'm coming in late, folks. We've been on the road in our search for a house in Tennessee. But, you know, first of all, Leo, can I quickly comment to what you were sharing about this very, very troubling news that you're getting from an insider within the Department of Homeland Security? You know, it shows you the impact of elections and the impact of, like you said, the embedding, because the deep state, even with Trump in, he's almost like a lone renegade now. The deep state around him is so powerful. It's so problematic. And what's concerning about, as I'm going to talk about the Patriot Network that we talked about on the last webinar, as we're going to talk about the need for citizens, for everybody out there that's watching this, to be able to get trained, get protected, get ready. Understand that the federal departments, these federal agencies, to the most extent, Department of Justice, the FBI, Homeland Security, they spend more time focusing on how to label you and I as domestic terrorists, as right-wing extremists, then, and Leo, to your point on the reporting that you did from Stonewall, from Georgia, about the militia, the Black Panther militias that were there, right? And you said that law enforcement basically didn't care. They weren't concerned at all.
Absolutely. And by the way, Shahram, that is another point that I discussed with this insider agent, high-level, top security guy. He said that in a major U.S. city, one of the largest U.S. cities, I'm not going to say which one it was because that could compromise him. They literally have, in the, not just the big city, but the entire county, they literally have 6 known white nationalists. And he said that the FBI field office that covers this city is obsessed with investigating these 6 white nationalist losers who are basically basement dwellers living in their mother's basements. They're not well funded. They're not well organized. They're certainly not well populated. If we only know of 6 of them. And yet this FBI field office is obsessed with investigating them, all to the detriment of investigating the real threats, which are the Marxist infiltrators who are inciting revolution right now in our country, the Islamic terrorists who we know are joining forces in the red-green axis. They're not interested in any of that. He said anything Islamic is completely forbidden. You cannot even talk about it in this FBI field office. If you do, you will be reprimanded. If you even suggest going after those targets, you will be shot down at a meeting, he said.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to the credit of our friend Phil Haney, our deceased friend Phil Haney, who was murdered, as he exposed the purging that had happened under Obama. I mean, I still think, Leo, that we are still learning of how terrible, how absolutely seditious this presidency and all the criminals that go along with it have been. We still don't understand the grasp of how much damage they have done to the republic. So, folks,
you're talking about the previous administration.
The previous administration, that, as you said, is carried into the Trump administration because of the fact that Trump has not been able to get rid of the Department of State actors, the DOJ actors. I mean, certainly we've seen the FBI. I mean, that's been exposed, to a major degree. So it is imperative to the action items that when we are talking about what can we do, because we cannot wait for, the law enforcement aspects. We cannot wait for the Department of Justice. We cannot wait for these folks because they're now looking at us as the enemy. Like you said, they're obsessed with us, even though we are talking about lawful constitutional concepts and defense. And to the point that you're making too, the same thing when I was in the inland Northwest, in Eastern Washington and Idaho, the same thing was going on with most of the law enforcement, particularly if they were being trained by the federal agencies, if they had any kind of cooperation, particularly on counterterrorism, because as you know, with counterterrorism, the Joint Terrorism Task Force oftentimes have the FBI working with the county, working with the state and the local. And I've trained JTTF folks, and they will tell you on the ground that's exactly what you said. Muslims are off limit. You cannot go after a Muslim, cannot in any way, shape, or form talk about their ideology because of the purging. And who are they focusing on? They literally have PowerPoints that I've seen that the sheriff in Spokane County put out, where they were comparing constitutionalists. Now, is that a dirty word? Those who believe in the Constitution of America, our rule of law, they were comparing constitutionalists to ISIS.
Huh.
So with that said, here's my point, and you and I were talking earlier, that when we talk about getting ready and forming groups and forming community and arming and training and getting ready, know how to protect our families and our communities, the reality, the perception is just as important as the principle. Because on the last program, we talked about the need for a well-regulated militia. Mm-hmm. Historically, the well-regulated militia, meaning pre-Revolutionary War, pre-founding of America and post-founding America, was the fact that every male that was able-bodied was required to have arms and was required to train regularly. The regulation part of it wasn't that government gave a citizen the right to train and be ready for whatever was needed to defend their homeland. It was the fact that they were well trained and it was a requirement and it was expected. Today, when we see the pictures and the images that you wrote about in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and you see a well-organized, funded, not just a militia, but a subversive, what was the term you used? Oh, the guerrillas, right? You used the term guerrilla. It was like guerrilla warfare. Mm-hmm. And so when you see that, and that's not a concern to law enforcement, what is a concern is the constitutional militias, meaning any citizen that is going to stand up and is going to say, I want to defend our rights. And I tell you, Leo, I just saw an article out of Boise, Idaho, where again, there was some planned protests and potentially riots by Black Lives Matter and the Antifa folks. And they were working with the student unions at Boise State University, because they drag the white people, young white people are being pulled through their white guilt and the supposed white privilege into supporting these thugs, these Marxists. And again, thanks to your reporting, we know the Islamists, the Muslims are in many cases right there with them. Ilhan Omar and her boyfriend, I remember that video that came out of Minneapolis where she was at the Antifa rally. She was, they're right in the mix together. So right. My point was, how did Boise not get burned or damaged? Because hundreds of armed citizens showed up on the streets to protect their community. And this is what we're talking about. It wasn't the police, it wasn't the FBI, it wasn't the state police, it wasn't even the county sheriff. It was armed citizens that came out and said, we're going to exercise our God-given rights under the Constitution, the Declaration, the Second Amendment Bill of Rights, and we're going to stand and protect our communities. But just understand, what's the perception? The perception, folks, is you now are the threat. So, Leah, I want you to comment on that, and then I'd love to be able to share, then go into and share a little bit about what happened in Virginia. I was just in Virginia with a lot of constitutionalists, praise God, a lot of patriot, God-fearing, patriot-loving, liberty-loving constitutionalists. And there's a lot of good stuff afoot that I want to talk about. But, you know, do you agree that while we can sit here and talk about theory, right? Well, the Constitution says this, our rights are this, the well-regulated militia is this. We have to also deal in reality and the perception that comes with that reality, which is exactly what you just spelled out. Your contact at the DHS is saying, this is the reality.
It's the current reality, correct. And it's a hostile environment right now for patriots. I don't care if you're black or white, brown, gay, straight, whatever. If you are, if you believe that the Constitution is the final law of the land and that we believe that our rights come from our Creator, that we are endowed with certain inalienable rights from our Creator, not the rights that today's politician says they're okay with us having, and then tomorrow they might not be. You know, for instance, gun rights or First Amendment rights. The First Amendment right now, in my opinion, is under complete and utter attack. And across the board, no matter where you live in America, it's impossible right now to hold a job with a major corporation and speak your mind if you're a Constitution-loving, patriotic American on, say, social media. If you say something as benign as all lives matter, you can be fired. There was a case of a Chinese immigrant student. Okay, this is an example of how it's not just white people. A Chinese immigrant who came here as a child and is now a student at Fordham University put on I think it was Instagram, he put on his Instagram account a memorial for the massacre of people, of patriots, Chinese patriots at Tiananmen Square. It was the 31st anniversary of that slaughter where the Chinese Communist Party rolled into Tiananmen Square and killed dozens of people and threw everyone else in jail and probably were never to be seen again, thousands. He wanted to memorialize that on his Instagram page. Do you know that Fordham University, where he's a student, suspended him?
Wow.
Rebuked him and said that he cannot return to campus until he undergoes sensitivity training.
Wow.
Fordham University in New York.
Right.
Unbelievable. You know, to that kid, he probably wonders why his parents ever left China at this point, you know?
Right, Leo. Exactly right. Isn't that crazy to think about that? And one of the things that I was sharing at the conference this weekend, again, about my own backstory was that, you know, you start thinking about that. You start thinking about that, you know, I fled my birth country, came to this nation for freedom. My dad brought us here. And you think at the end of the day, you think, well, was it all worth it? Was it all worth it when watching where this nation's going? And so to the point of, okay, we have a reality, but I want to say
the reality is the First Amendment is gone and they're coming for the Second Amendment.
The Second Amendment.
That was going to be my final point.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
They go exactly, and they go hand in hand, because if you remove the Second Amendment, if you remove the check on the government, remember again, the Second Amendment says, and I'll bring up the slide here in a minute, that a well-regulated militia is necessary for the securing of a free state. Therefore, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon. So we're talking about, if we want to secure a free state, and that could mean, you know, obviously states' rights, but also our nation. Therefore, we must now be the citizens who will stand up and understand the Second Amendment is the only thing that is keeping this tyrannical government, this corrupt globalist cabal that you've described, that is going to force us not to the vaccines and whatever else, that the only thing to check them is the Second Amendment. Because they obviously, after COVID, have no regard for the First Amendment. They'll tell you and I, you can't protest, you can't rally, yet still they're allowing rioters and looters to gather, even though we know that the evidence has shown that in many of these cities where they've had spikes in cases is because of these looters and rioters who are in close proximity, yelling and shouting and spitting on each other, and
But when it was the conservative, patriotic Americans who went to rally at the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan, what was the response from Governor Gretchen Whitmer? She accused them of being basically Nazis and unsympathetic, horrible Trump supporters, MAGA hat wearers, gun toters, and she actually threatened that her lockdown would be extended because of them. She threatened them. She threatened to punish the entire state because they were exercising their First Amendment rights. But then when the rioters and they were completely peaceful. Many of them had guns on their sides, not all of them, but many did, but they were completely peaceful, did nothing to break any laws, cleaned up after themselves, on the perfect honor. But then when the left got out in the cities of Detroit and, Flint and wherever else in Michigan they were rioting, she encouraged them. She actually went out and marched with them on at least one occasion, where she was side by side with one of the most vicious imams in the entire state. Imam, he's a Shiite imam in Dearborn Heights. Elahi, exactly. Exactly. So you see the two standards here. One side, this goes back to the cultural Marxist Herbert Marcuse in the 1930s, where he said that it's basically free speech for me, but not for thee. Where you allow the Marxists to have all the free speech they want, but you apply a completely different standard to your enemies, the enemies being the people who support freedom.
That's right.
And bring everything to bear on them. The same with the Alinsky rules, where you just go after your enemies and no holds barred, call them names, ridicule them. It's that. And Alinsky was a student of the cultural Marxist Frankfurt School. So it was no surprise that he implemented those rules. And, this is someone who Hillary Clinton admired and Barack Obama admired. This is a man who dedicated his book, Rules for Radicals, to Lucifer. So you're right. The First Amendment is in sad shape right now in America. It is selectively applied depending on your politics. The Second Amendment is not, it depends on the state. I'm going to be frank. Right now, it completely depends on the state that you live in as far as the extent of your Second Amendment rights. It's nationwide, the problem with the First Amendment. But the Second Amendment, if you live in, Virginia, New York, Oregon, Washington State, California, you're in a world of hurt in terms of your Second Amendment rights. Well, not nearly as bad in Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, South Carolina, Alabama, states like that.
And surprisingly, Leo, to jump into again this weekend in Virginia, surprisingly, I was very happy to see.
Yeah, tell us about what happened there.
Because obviously Virginia has a very leftist governor, but I got to speak with one of the gentlemen who's head of the Citizen Coalition for the Second Amendment in Virginia. A positive thing that happened there when Northam, their governor, came after their Second Amendment rights was that they organized a rally at their
Mhm.
state capitol where they had 50,000 people come out. 50,000. They
Wow.
really got upset, and as a result of the 95 counties, I believe 95 that are in Virginia, I think 90, 89, 90, maybe 91, they have been able to have those counties at the local level, county commissioners, declared to be sanctuaries counties for the Second Amendment. So when we talk about the concept of sanctuary,
Does that mean they have the sheriffs on board with it?
well, not all the sheriffs are on board, but the county execs or the commissioners are. So they passed the resolution to declare. Now, again, it's a resolution,
Right.
but it shows you the hopefully the understanding. And what I was really impressed by was that the people that I was around in Virginia really had a very good understanding of how serious of a time we are in and how critical it is. And it was because of that that I was able to speak not only on, and I'll show you the PowerPoint in just 1 minute, but I was able to speak with I mean, for the fact that this was the first event that they had at a church as a conference since opening COVID. There was about 80 people there, which doesn't sound a lot, but it was a lot for the fact that it was, the first event. And those people,
they were not in masks or
they
in
were
masks?
not in masks. No one was social distancing unless they wanted to, but
Right.
nobody was, and nobody was forcing anything, and the church was meeting, and it was, and listen, when we talk about patriot churches, the church that I spoke at in Saturday, that's a patriot pastor, and that was a patriot church. And it is that church, by the way, that wants me to come back and share on the concept of not just making liberty great and the sanctuary states and counties, but also on the committees of correspondence, the committees of safety that I'll show you just in a minute. So it was very encouraging. I think that there's a lot to build on, because I told them, look, if you can pass a resolution to make your county a sanctuary county for the Second Amendment, you can pass a resolution to make it a sanctuary state for the unborn. You can pass a resolution to make it a sanctuary state for parental rights. You can make a resolution. Listen, I talked to a gal, Leo, that she's connected to a group there, Virginia Something for Liberty. They have over 2,000 active members, a lot of moms. And you get moms mad, and now things happen. And those moms have one mission, and that is that they believe in medical freedom, and that every person should have a right to decide whether the government is going to stick a vaccine in their kids or themselves or not. They believe that is a right of the individual.
That is a fundamental human right.
Human right.
If we don't have control over what the government says we must inject into our bodies, then folks, there is nothing left. There is nothing they can't do to us.
Right. So I said, put forth resolution, start in county by county and make it a sanctuary county for medical freedom. What happened to, again, my body, my choice. So there is some good movement there. I connected with some folks that know folks in Tennessee as we try to get this patriot movement up and running. My good friend, Pastor Ken Peters, is now down in Tennessee with me. And we're going to be starting a patriot church. He's starting, and of course, I'm helping him. I'm not going to pastor locally, but we're going to be starting that in September. And we identified 2 patriot churches there in 2 counties there in Southwest Virginia. And if I can quickly go to the screen share, I want to share with folks a little bit about what I shared about the sanctuary states, and then the committees. Is that okay? And I need a little bit of time, and then I'll come back and we can, go back to your comments, Leo, and then take questions. So let me go to the screen share here and just go on my PowerPoint right there.
There's a right way and a wrong way to do this, correct?
There is. So can you guys see that okay, Leo? You can see that?
Yes, I can.
Good. So we talked about 3 key things. If we're going to see liberty, and I talked about not just, individual liberty, but I talked about even the spiritual liberty. The Bible says where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And so I talked about 3 key components to being able to make liberty great again and to create the environment for sanctuary counties and states. This is sort of the precursor. One, you got to consolidate patriots who love liberty. So we talked about this word consolidation. I actually talked to a mom who said, my county is so-so. I said, well, would you be open to moving to another county that you know that you have a constitutional sheriff, that you know that you would have, let's say, strong county commissioners? And I'll show you in a minute here, again, the 4 key positions that we've identified at the county level. So consolidating patriots who love liberty. And then we identified, and this is on the website, Leo, sanctuarystatesforliberty.com. We talked about that we need to start this movement locally.
Right.
So it's very critical, locally, so that we can take back our communities, our states, from the clutches of tyrants, socialists, Marxists, and the Muslims and the Islamic movement. And we identified these 3 liberties: political liberty, economic liberty, and religious liberty. You see, these are all interconnected.
Yes.
Because if you want to have religious liberty, you have to fight for political liberty. Because if you have a government that doesn't understand the liberty, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration, the Constitution, they're not going to, as you are just said, they're going to trounce over religious liberty and the First Amendment. If you can't make a living, if you can't move about, if you can't, as you just said, you can't keep a job. All these cowards in the government that are afraid of what kind of job they're going to get post serving the Trump administration,
Right.
because of the cancel culture, and because of the really, these are bullies. And so we talked about these 3 liberties. Now, I'm not going to go through all this. This is on the website. So again, check out the website. But we talked about some of the principles that must be there to have economic liberty, like restoring sound money, protecting vital businesses, limiting immigration and refugee resettlement, particularly to protect American jobs and families in this time. We talked about a lot of the aspects of the political liberty, defending the freedom of assembly, like you talked about, Leo, that you can't go and protest and be able to have a rally anymore without being called a murderer or, being told that we take it away. Reclaiming Second Amendment rights, creating your county as a constitutional carry county, ending the tyranny of international agreements that infringe upon constitutional states' rights. Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, rejecting those, rejecting sustainable development, rejecting
almost all of this, from the immigration to the protecting property rights, and all that has to do with Agenda 2030.
Exactly. Critical piece there. And the new Green Deal. One of the things I showed them that I don't have time tonight is maybe on another program, Leo, we can highlight a youth organization that is called the Sunrise Movement. I don't know if you heard about this, but the Sunrise Movement, which actually, I was telling people, many people think AOC, right, Ocasio-Cortez is sort of just the airhead, right? But she's actually the leader of this movement. And they're not only recruiting young people to become these activists that look for trigger events, and then they get activated, like after George Floyd's death. They were predominantly behind the Minneapolis riots and the burning of the streets. But they're told it is justifiable to burn buildings, destroy cars, take over police stations, destroy property. And one of the key guys that is one of their international advisors, this guy actually owns a company that trains our military and law enforcement.
Right. I saw that.
They are not only arming them, the left is being armed and trained by the same companies that train our military. You know what they train them in? You know what this guy does when he trains them? He trains them in counterinsurgency.
Yes.
So he's training them when they go into Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, how to become counterinsurgents. Well, he's training them the same way, how to agitate to the point of the new order, the new normal. So
there is actually a field manual that our government put out for the counterinsurgency movement in Iraq. It was used in Iraq and Afghanistan. I downloaded it. I'm in the process of going over it, but I am told that is the playbook that they are using. They used this to do regime changes in Iraq and Afghanistan, our government, and that is the playbook that they are using to do a regime change here in America now with
Exactly.
this coup attempt against
It's
Trump.
coup. Exactly. This is
Yeah.
a coup, folks.
It's psyop. It's mostly psyops.
It is a lot of psyops, and they're very organized online. They mobilize quickly. Of course, they're well funded because their side funds them very well. And predominantly, folks, again, I want to say it one more time, predominantly it's a youth movement. They're actually working on training even young kids as young as 11 and 12. And they have curriculum that they have in the schools using the new Green Deal to be able to mobilize their recruits, and of course pushing the whole white guilt, white privilege notion. So anyway, going back, Leo, the concept is, I'm trying to get people to understand that these are all things that are principles that we have to be against, and we have to be for the principles of our Constitution. How about this one? Defending our founding principles from any foreign law, again, including not only these UN agendas, but Sharia, impeaching and voting out judges and elected officials that violate their oath of office to the federal and state constitutions. There are so many now that have violated their oath of office. And here's a great point that somebody made at the conference. One of the speakers made this point. We are under de facto martial law because if the governors can declare a state of emergency and they're telling us, look, temporarily your rights have been suspended. Temporarily the Constitution is being suspended. Well, if the Constitution has been suspended, then that means their authority has been suspended. Think about that for a second. That means that they are not lawfully in a position of authority over you. They've actually suspended themselves. So why are we obeying them? And then finally, I talked about religious liberty. I talked about safeguarding religious liberty and sanctity of marriage, sanctity of the churches. I mean, it's crazy what's going on with all these churches and how they've been shut down. And so, again, creating sanctuary counties for the unborn, sanctuary states for the unborn, parental rights, medical decision. Again, all those things that I just said to you, it was very well received, folks. There are those who are there at the local level. This is still, there's fire for this. And I think if we can organize and mobilize, there's a chance. Second thing, Leo, I talked about the importance of patriot churches. So one, you need to consolidate patriot-loving, liberty-loving patriots. Two, we need patriot churches and patriot pastors. When you look at the Revolutionary War before the foundation of America, I believe that it would have not happened had it not been for the Black Robe Regiment pastors, those who the British had labeled as the Black Robe because they had their black robes on, and underneath their black robes, they had their military attire that they had on in allegiance to the local patriots against the British. And so when you look at the condition of our churches, the governors that have shut down the churches, I'm going to California next weekend. The church is having me out, folks, is doing it in defiance of the governor. They are now illegal. And that pastor is talking about the need to have to go underground soon. This is not a joke anymore. This is reality when we talk about a secure patriot network, an underground patriot network, an underground church network like we see in China, in Iran, and in other places. Leo, did you see this headline? Andy Stanley from your neck of the woods announces that they're canceling all in-person services for the rest of the year.
Yes.
What? For the rest of the year. Folks, these are not churches anymore. They're good for nothing. They're good for nothing.
What are they? I mean, I agree. These are not churches. Are they just like social clubs or something? Or
they're entertainment centers. They're money-making centers.
Money-making entertainment centers.
That's right. And Leo, again, as we've talked about before, if you were to actually track some of these churches that won't open, you will find out that they're getting money from the government. A lot of times they're children's programs or youth programs. They will apply for these grants from the government, and therefore they don't want to bite the hand that's feeding them. Why is the church getting any money from the government to do God's work? We should not be taking a dime. That's the violation of the separation of church and state. That's the true violation of the separation of church and state. So again, the condition of the church, and of course, you and I have talked about all these things leading to
Yes.
the coming one world religion, where the church has no discernment to recognize the great apostasy that
Yes.
is coming upon it. All these Christians.
Shahram, you are right on it here. And before you were able to join us, I was going in. I don't know if you caught any of it while you were on the line listening, but I was recapitalizing some of what happened yesterday and today with this Epstein sex ring related case, and with the now the shooting of the judge's son to death on Sunday. The judge who'd been assigned the case that involved Epstein's financial dealings with Deutsche Bank, her son was murdered in cold blood Sunday.
Wow.
And then the killer now today killed himself.
Wow.
Interesting, eh? And
Interesting.
so I cannot help but have brought to my mind the verse in Revelation. I don't remember the chapter and verse, but it's in Revelation where it talks about when you see these things happening, and it talks about, this, that, and the other, the violence, the this, and I think it has to do with the whore of Babylon, Mystery Babylon. And it's talking about how she has this great wealth, and what have we been talking about today? How money is playing such a huge role in all of this, whether it's the government officials who are on the take or worried about their post-government careers, and how these guys go in and out of government, making billions, here in the private industry because they came out of government and they bring their knowledge and contacts with them. And so they get paid millions to do that when they're done with their government career. Now you're telling me about mega churches who aren't really churches at all, but they're actually money-making entertainment centers.
That's right, Leo.
And they're getting money from the government, the taxpayer. They're feeding off of us. They're abusing us financially. And it reminded me of that verse in Revelation where it talked about this whore of Babylon and how she's just gaudy with wealth and, jewels, and drunk with the blood of the martyrs. And it said that, she trades in all manner with the kings of the earth, with the rich, the gold, the silver, the fine linens, and even the bodies and souls of human beings. Do you know the verse I'm talking about?
I believe, I think it's in Revelation 16. I have to look it up, but I know exactly what you're talking about, Mystery Babylon.
Yes.
And hey, listen, it's interesting because, there are some Bible scholars, and I'm not sure if I fall on this, and I'm not trying to get into eschatology right now, but there are some Bible scholars that think that refers to basically the wealth of America, the wealth of the wicked. Now, it could be America, or it could be just generally the wealth of the wicked. But
it could be the whole globalist,
exactly,
the globalist system where the rich billionaires, like I said, feed off of the sweat and the blood of the working people, and they keep their dirty, dark secrets from everyone. Well, the Bible seems to be telling us that that's all going to be exposed and and destroyed at some point.
That's right. And so the whole aspect of a corrupt church. So my point being, I was trying to show them that these churches are not churches anymore. So we need true Bible-believing, God-fearing churches and pastors. And it was so encouraging to run into two, in Southwest Virginia, where they were standing, and they're not afraid to talk about these things. They're not afraid to talk about politics and talk about the Constitution and talk about the rule of law. And so just moving on here, the Patriot churches, and again, of course, in our DVD, when we talk about Islam as an Antichrist spirit, I think ultimately what you're witnessing is the rise of an Antichrist spirit that is engulfing the planet and engulfing the church. So the only way we can stand up against this is to be that church. And I shared this quote from Charles Finney, Reverend Charles Finney. He wrote this article, The Decay of Conscience, in 1873 during the Second Great Awakening. And he says, "Brethren, our preaching will bear its legitimate fruits. If immorality prevails in the land, the fault is ours in a great degree. If there is a decay of conscience, watch this now, the pulpit is responsible for it. Now, folks, when you're reading this, remember this is written 1873. Tell me if you think this is like it was written yesterday. If the public press lacks moral discrimination, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the church is degenerate and worldly, what are we just talking about, Leo? The pulpit is responsible for it. If the world loses its interest in religion, the pulpit is responsible for it. If Satan rules in the halls of our legislation, the pulpit is responsible for it. If our politics become so corrupt that the very foundations of our government are ready to fall away, the pulpit is responsible for it. Let us not ignore this fact, my dear brethren, but let us lay it to heart and be thoroughly awake to our responsibility in respect to the morals of this nation. These are the kind of churches that we need, folks. These are the kind of patriots we need. The ones who are not afraid only to preach the kingdom of God and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, but they're not afraid to do that, but they're also not afraid to say, it is our responsibility as Christians to hold our government to account. God has instituted civil authority, and we have to do it. And I believe one of the ways, Leo, that I'm trying to bring this about is helping us to identify in your area, folks. If you can find even one pastor that is standing like this, that's a courageous pastor who's not afraid to talk about these things, let us know. I love this description from Charles Galloway. Look at this. Mighty men they were, of iron nerve and strong hand and unblanched cheek and heart of flame. God needed not reeds shaken by the wind, nor men clothed in soft raiment, but heroes of hardihood and lofty courage. And such were the sons of the mighty who responded to the divine call. You know where it says men clothed in soft raiment? I think about all these weak-kneed, skinny jeans wearing, cool glasses, cool hair pastors. Glad that I don't have any more hair left, that I don't have to style it and make it all cool, folks. We don't need those type of pastors. We need these type of pastors. And this is a picture here on the screen.
The time for the pretty boys is over. We need some real men.
The weak-kneed, pretty boy, soft-spoken, I don't want to offend anybody pastor is gone, folks. We're way beyond that. And we need this revival again. And listen, I got to move on here. But when we talked about this liberty movement, together we can do this, at least at our local level. Now, the sanctuary states concept is obviously, we're trying to test it out in Tennessee. But what I saw in Virginia was encouraging, because as I said, even though at the state level, they have obviously issues and their governor is a big issue, but they are seeing a lot of movement in their counties. And that's exactly how it's got to be done. So we're now trying to get the ball rolling here in Tennessee and wherever you guys, in Georgia, Leo, where you are, in other places. At least I was encouraged that your governor said that no local level government can pass a more restrictive measure than the governor. So that was at least a positive thing there. Now, with the sanctuary states, I emphasize on the political level, and we're going to get to the behind the scenes in a minute, but on the political level, 4 key positions again. This is the lowest magistrate concept, because the lowest magistrate means that when there's a delegation of power, when the upper magistrates are failing to defend the Constitution, it is then responsible to the lowest magistrates. Now, Leo, here's a question for the audience. What is the lowest magistrate in our republic? The lowest magistrate. Now, the lowest elected magistrate is the sheriff, the county sheriff. But the lowest magistrate is we, the people, in our constitutional republic, because the Declaration is very clear that the government is formed by the consent of the governed. So you and I are giving consent, meaning we are lending our authority to be governed. Well, here's the concept. Can you take your consent back? So when we talk about forming these committees, which I'm just going to get to in a minute, it's important to understand that while we want to identify a county sheriff and a county prosecutor, why are those 2 positions so important? Because the county sheriff and the county prosecutor can nullify, any unconstitutional edict or legislation or court opinion one of the speakers made a great point this weekend and said, when the Supreme Court rules, it is not a law, it is not a judgment. If you read it, it says the word opinion. It is an opinion. So why are we treating it like it's law and going along with it? So anyway, your county sheriff, county prosecutor, they can simply say, listen, the Constitution is still intact. If this governor, if this mayor, if the Supreme Court, whatever, brings this ruling down, this edict, we refuse to enforce it. We refuse to follow it. That's the concept of nullification. They're not trying to pass anything. They just refuse to be able to implement something that is unconstitutional. Now, they can work with the third position, which are county commissioners, and the fourth position, which is your county executive, or in Tennessee, we have county mayors. I'm still trying to get used to this concept.
Yeah.
So these are the four key positions to be able to fight for those three great liberties: political, economic, and religious. And again, folks, if we can make sanctuary states for the Second Amendment, we can make sanctuary states for the unborn, for parental rights, for religious freedom, for medical freedom, for sound money, all those principles we can do. By the way, we have one county in Tennessee, I think I mentioned that not only has become a sanctuary state for the Second Amendment, they also became a sanctuary state against refugee resettlement. So there's another thing that we can do. Now, finally, the fifth key position is your state legislator. Because in Virginia, I learned, Leo, the reason that they're able to still hold their governor at bay to some extent is because of the fact that they got some pretty gutsy state legislators that are standing up against the governor. This is important. But I also want to emphasize, and I emphasize to the crowd, the time has come, and you talked about this in your article, and I 100% agree, to build a secure patriot network.
Right.
And in this area, meaning southeast of the nation, I spent 5.5 years working in the inland Northwest with many great patriots to work on building a secure patriot network in that area, in the inland Northwest. There is such a thing right now, and many of those folks are preparing themselves for what is potentially coming. And as I mentioned, we saw great examples of that in both North Idaho and now South Idaho with their constitutional militias, with their patriots who stood up against a direct threat to their community. So going to the point of the militia, the first key to the Secure Patriot Network is identifying and organizing that well-regulated militia. The wording here in the Constitution, the Second Amendment, the Bill of Rights, the word regulated, but the founders understood it to be, and they said very clearly in the Federalist Papers, it meant simply that those were well-trained citizens who were necessary for the securing of a free state. So that means, folks, if you're waiting for the bad stuff to hit the fan before you go out and buy a gun, before you go and know how to use that gun securely, safely, lawfully, before you even load your ammo, if you have not trained, please don't do it, because you will be a danger to yourself and to somebody else. If you're going to do this, you must be well trained. That means get it now, learn it, go get training, go take courses, know how to know your rights for concealed carry, know what states you can conceal carry in. Some states you can't, some states you can, some states are different. So you have to, and Leo said this already, different states have different places. But the other thing, Leo, we're working on is that we're working on those folks are going to come together and actually say, we are a militia. Understand, number one, you got to be organized. So you got to have leadership. You got to have some structure so that it's not just willy-nilly. You got to train. And number three, you should at least try to have a rapport with your county sheriff if they're amiable to that rapport. But as we said earlier, given the environment of the FBI and the federal government, know that you also may become a target because they view any constitutional militia as a threat, but they don't apparently view the other side. So what I want to encourage folks is you got to ask around your area. Ask those who are active and who are well connected. Hey, is there a militia in this area? Is there one that it has been identified? And historically, now I'm going to quickly get to this. And today, folks, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief overview of the historicity of the committees of safety and the committees of correspondence. And then, we'll build on this as time goes. But pre-Revolutionary War, Leo, there were, going back to 1760s, and particularly 1765 and on, going into the late 1760s, different groups in the colonies began to form what were called committees of safety. The committees of safety, what were they? They were actually civil body politics. So when the people came together, they came together and they formed under a compact. Now, why were they forming? Well, go back about 60 years. In the early turn of the century, at around 1600, you had the settling right of the Mayflower, right? The separatists, pilgrims who came over, fleeing. Remember, they were fleeing religious persecution. They didn't come over here just to get land or property. They came over here because they were fleeing religious persecution. When they came over, when they got here, they understood there was no government, right? There was no government. And they understood that they cannot function without being a civil government, because they would be anarchists. They'd be rebellious to God. So that under compact, the Mayflower Compact, if you haven't read it lately, I encourage you to read it. They formed that civil authority. It's called the civil body politic. It's a civil government. Now, there was also one earlier in Jamestown, in the Jamestown colony, where they had a civil body politic. Now, what the committees did subsequently, meaning now we're talking about 60 plus years later, is when they formed provisionally. The word provisional means they formed the civil body politic, but they were not the existing government, because there was an existing government in the form of the crown, right? The British crown. So the British crown was their authority over them, but because of the tyranny and remember the Declaration says the long train of abuses, they were forming these committees in preparation. Now, this is what's crazy. Fast forward. In 1774, when things were heating up, when the abuses were growing, the various committees that had formed throughout the colonies are actually the ones who called for the First Continental Congress. Now, I'm sure most people out there who've studied their history have heard about the Continental Congress. But how many people knew that it was the committees of safety that called for it to be formed? And so they sent delegates. Now, what does that look like? They elected 2 or 3 delegates, maybe more. Some had more, some had only a couple. And they sent those delegates from town to county to provincial, all the way up to Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. As we know, that First Continental Congress was adjourned and they went back home. Then later in 1774, in Western Massachusetts, the Committee of Safety sent armed militia to force the resignation of judges appointed under the Massachusetts Government Act, because again, this is what the Crown had done and was abusing their rights. So this is where you see you see that the Committee of Safety was overseeing the militia. Are we getting that, folks? You have to have a civil body politic that oversees the militia. The militia cannot be a civil body politic. The militia cannot also be the Committee of Safety or vice versa. Here's the interesting.
Okay, let me stop
ahead,
you for a
go
second
ahead.
there.
Go ahead.
So, Shahram, what about these well-established militias that are already in place? Like in Georgia, you know, we have the 3%ers, and I don't know what their numbers are, how often they meet, where they meet, what they do, but do they have some sort of civil overseers, and or do you know?
Well, no, because unless there are these committees formed, there is no civil oversight unless they have submitted themselves to the sheriff.
Okay.
In Virginia, where I just came from, their committee, or I'm sorry, their militia in that county, which includes members of the 3%ers, members of the Oath Keepers, they submitted themselves. They went before their board of commissioners. They went before the sheriff. They formed relationship, and they said, "Hey, we formed, but we're submitting ourselves to you." That's the right thing to do. That's the lawful thing to do. If you can do that, if you have a county that you can do that. What we're saying is, in preparation for the fact that you may not have a county that is going to see those groups as favorable, you need to form a committee. And when we formed committees, we reached out to our local militias. We contacted them. We invited them to the table. In fact, when I go back to Virginia, I'm going to be meeting with leadership of the 3%ers, of the Oath Keepers, of their militia, present them with the idea of the committee, and say, there are plans underway to form one of these committees here in this area. I'm not going to say the area, obviously. And therefore, we want you to submit once this committee is formed, because the committee is formed by compact, meaning individuals come together and they give their consent. You see how that works? This is the way our government was formed. And so when individuals give their consent through the compact that they agree upon, then they form the Committee of Safety, the Committee of Correspondence, and that becomes a provisional civil body politic. Now, I know somebody out there is thinking, well, is this some sort of a shadow government thing? Because you're provisional. You're not overthrowing, you're not declaring, you're not trying to take over anything. You're simply forming. And the militia now has a place to go to, Leo. And so we applaud those groups that are out there that are organized, like the 3%ers, like the Oath Keepers, like the Lightfoot brigades, and all those groups. We need that, but we got to also organize them. And historically, what I'm trying to show is that they were under the authority of the committees. And therefore, here we have on April 12, 1775, just 1 week before the Battle of Lexington Concord. Remember the shot that was heard around the world. How many of you know who John Hancock is? Remember John Hancock, the big signature on the Declaration? Well, John Hancock, folks, was president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, but that later became the Massachusetts Provincial Committee of Safety. John Hancock was a member of the Committee of Safety. Did you let that settle in, folks? And in fact, on May 10th, after the Battle of Lexington happened, they realized things were ramping up. May 10th, 1775, the various committees wrote letters and saying, we're calling for the Second Continental Congress. It reconvened. At that Continental Congress, they stayed open, right? They stayed open. They did not adjourn this time. Ultimately, in the midst of this process, people need to remember that they had sent a letter with their grievances to the king. The letter was returned back to them saying, if you persist in this direction, you will all be hung. When the Second Continental Congress formed, they had sent delegates from the committees up, and subsequently on July the 2nd, we have to know our history, folks, not July 4th. July 4th was the formal signing, the press get attention signing. The deal was signed was agreed on July 2nd, 1776, to declare independence from Great Britain, from the crown, and that birthed the committee. Now, this is the crazy part. Every signer of the Declaration of Independence were members of the Committees of Safety. Every signer of now, By the way, 29 of the 56 signers were pastors. So how critical were pastors were the Black Robe Regiment? More than half of the signers were ministers of the gospel. But all of the signers of the Declaration were members of the committees of safety, including John Hancock, including Jefferson, and others. This is our history, folks. And one more crazy fact, Leo, before I move on. Do you know that when they formed our government that has the three branches, the judicial, legislative, and executive, can I tell you, they didn't just pull this out of a rabbit's hat. They were actually practicing it in the committees. The committees had executive, they had chairs and vice chairs. The committees had a judicial branch to them. And the committees, the body at large, was their legislative branch. So they were actually operating in three branches internally. And when they formed the government mirrored what they were doing in the committee. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
This is literally our history. And I believe that these are needed again for representation, to unite us, to organize us, for communications, for coordination, for education, for establishing the principles of honor, justice, and mercy, to present those grievances. We need to correspond with other committees. We need to demand that our local government obeys the Constitution and nullifies anything that goes against the Constitution. And we need to have these committees who will then assist the sheriff under the Posse Comitatus Act in times of trouble. Because remember, folks, the sheriff has the ability to deputize. And as we said before, that should be one of the questions that you should ask your sheriff. Sheriff, will you enact the Posse Comitatus Act and deputize your county if needed? I believe that, Leo, we're on a coming storm. We're under de facto martial law. Churches that should have been assembling are shuttered. Our economic, political, and religious liberties are being egregiously violated. Egregiously. As you said, the First Amendment is being shredded. There is a long train of abuses, and so much has happened in the last 5 months. It's just unbelievable. I was, again,
you could look at every level of what you mentioned. You know, the economic, with so-called non-essential small businesses being shuttered, forcibly shuttered, while their competitors in the big box stores are able to stay open.
Exactly.
Churches being forcibly shuttered.
Exactly.
The political, you've got the political abuses of one side's able to go out and exercise their First Amendment rights. Someone of another persuasion is not, or at least they're roundly criticized when they do, and threatened with more lockdowns.
Exactly.
Right. So you've got all three facets of abuses. Yeah,
that's right. All three, and at all levels. So from the federal to the state to the local. So we are in a long train of abuses. I mean, when I was giving this presentation years ago, 2010, 2011, 2012, and on, when we would talk about these scenarios of martial law, state of emergency, declaration of emergencies, what are they going to use? I kid you not. I was talking about that they're going to defund the police and all these things. Everything back then was theory.
Right.
Now everything has happened. So as you and I have said on other programs, folks, if you do nothing else, if you have no interest in these committees, at least prepare food, water, funds, and supplies. You need to get some stuff on hand. We believe in two precious metals, right? Silver and lead. Get yourself some silver. Sound money, right? Sound money. If you can afford gold, great. But if you can't afford gold, get some silver so you can barter, you can trade. And I believe in lead. I believe that we have a right to be well stocked in all of our facets of being able to defend ourselves. Again, please don't go and say, I'm just going to buy a gun and put it in my safe and never look at it, never touch it. You have to be trained, and you have to know how to use it lawfully and properly, safely. That is what it means to be well-regulated militia. And of course, if you want to join one of those groups, we talked about with our kids, Leo, homeschooling, private schools. We talked about, again, if you're interested in starting a committee in your area, folks, email me. Send me an email at info@TIL Project. Let me know who you are. Let me know a little bit about yourself, because I don't know who you are. I may not know who you are. And we'll see if there's other people in your area. But the key is begin to talk to people. Begin to share these webinars. Say, hey, watch this webinar. Are you in agreement, or you think I'm a kook? If they think you're a kook, well, then you know you shouldn't be talking to them.
Exactly.
But if they're in agreement, then you got someone else you can join with. How about this? House churches. We need to pray for the rising up of the true church. The time for house churches is here. So people tell me all the time, Shahram, I can't find the church. My church won't open up. All these churches are shuttered and shut down. They're worth nothing. Andy Stanley, 2021. Oh my gosh, these people are insane. They're being exposed for who they are. Andy Stanley, I believe, is being exposed as a hireling, not a true shepherd of God. But we need house churches. So I tell people, listen, can you find 4, 5, 6 like-minded people in your area? And look, folks, if you can't, then maybe it's time to pray and ask God to consolidate. This is what we got to do. The left has no problem moving across country for their cause. Maybe it's time that we also have to pray about consolidating. And it's not easy, right, folks? It's not easy. Listen, I'm not trying to tell you about my problems. I've been living in a hotel room for the last 30 days. Tonight, I was able to borrow a motorhome of a pastor friend of mine here.
Shahram, you were liberated from the hotel room today.
I was liberated from the hotel room to a motorhome. So now with 5 kids in a motorhome for the next few days, and then we'll go from there. But listen, folks, it's not easy. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Liberty is worth it. Freedom is worth it. The time is now for us to stand up. And finally, please get right with God. The days are here. You got to get right with God. And so, Leo, I'll turn it back to you. Tell me what you think. I got to plug in my computer. So while you do that, give me 1 second. I'm going to stop share here. And then, actually, last thing real quick before I plug in my computer, let me know what you guys think. Because listen, I know this is history. There's no doubt this is our history. The question is it needed? Well, I can tell you that it's needed. I can tell you in the Southeast, there's nothing like it. I can tell you there really is no secure patriot movement right now, like we were able to get formed up in the inland Northwest. We formed 18 of these committees across 3 states in about a 4-year period. That was without the conditions we are in. Wow. I think it's going to go much faster because people are in a way different place than they were then. So let us know.
No longer theory, is it, Shahram?
It's no longer theory, brother.
We're living it. We're living it.
Exactly. So tell me what you think while excuse me 1 second, folks. I got to get my, I forgot to plug in my computer. I got to get my cord before the computer dies. I don't want to lose you guys. So Leo, you just tell people what you think, and I'll get my cord real quick.
Sure. I just want to say that I think that Shahram is definitely the man of the moment with these organizational structures that he put forth. We've all thought about forming, some sort of secure patriot group, but we don't really know how to go about it. And so I would like to commend him for all of his knowledge. It sounds like he's got years of knowledge. And I feel like God has prepared him for this moment because he's already done this in another part of the country. And like he said, we're now at 0 hour here in America. 0 hour, folks. The time is short. We've literally got potentially no more than 2.5 or 3 months before we see some really nasty stuff coming to bear at all levels. Our communities, depending where we live, it could be right in our own neighborhoods. Violence. We don't know where it's going to happen, but we know it's going to happen. And there's a lot of talk, a lot of chatter out there to keep an eye on November, regardless of the outcome of the presidential race. Just a couple of comments on the physical preparations. A lot of people think about when you talk about supplies and prepping, a lot of people think about physical stocking up your cupboards and your pantries and your closets and shelves lining with food. You know, you got to have food, you got to have water, you got to have different things, and that's been well discussed. And there's so many different websites that can, and YouTube channels, great information that can tell you how to do that. We don't have a lot of time though, so if you haven't started, you know, you're behind the 8 ball, because you can't do this overnight unless you're super wealthy. Then I guess you can. Most of us aren't, but there's still time, so let's get on it. However, I just want to put out the word of warning that it's more than just stocking up your cabinet when we talk about prepping. When we say that we need to make sure that our supplies are in order, we're really talking about developing supply lines. Think of your household and your family as a little miniature economy. And when you think about the general economy, you've got to have open supply lines, meaning you've got to have a supplier to you can go to when you run out of something. Or when you just need some kind of service. Say you've got dental work that needs to get done, or you've got a health problem that needs to be attended to. You know, you have got to start now developing a network of folks who will provide those services to you, those goods and services, even if we get into a situation, say a year. I don't think this is going to come down immediately, but it could come down as soon as a year, possibly 2, where you will not be able to get these supplies from your traditional sources without showing digital proof of vaccine. And most of us on this webinar don't want to be put in that position, right?
Right.
So we've got a year, maybe a little more, to start finding out who we can go to sort of in a underground network who will, you know, pull a tooth for us if we've got an abscess, you know, a doctor
right.
who, you know, isn't going to say, show me your proof of vaccine, or a doctor who can, you know, check your heart if you've got heart problems. So think of it in terms of that: goods, services, not just supplies, but supply lines. Ammunition. You know, some of you are not gun people. You've never shot a gun in your life, and frankly, you don't ever want to. I actually know people, and this is a issue of conscience, so you really can't argue with them, who say, I could never shoot someone. Even, I know people, I know it's hard to believe for some of you, but there are people like this. They have a pacifistic mindset, and they literally cannot bear or could not live with themselves if they shot even a criminal coming into their house. So I say to those folks, okay, I'm not going to argue with you, but you know what? It's still a good idea to have some ammunition on hand. As Shahram pointed out, gold, silver, and lead, precious metals, that ammunition could be used as barter.
That's
that
right.
ammunition might buy your family their next meal.
Mm-hmm.
And so definitely stock up on ammunition, even if you're not a gun person, even if you don't own a gun. 9mm is probably the most popular round. 9mm, 223, those are the most hard to get, but they're the most in demand. So they tend to make a lot of it. Right now they're short, but it could come back to be more available soon. Toilet paper, things like that. That's another thing. Buy more than you need, right? Don't be the person who goes to the store and the shelves are bare. Start stocking up on those type of things right now, even if it seems like it's way more than you would even need, just because, again, you could trade it in a barter situation. Think about things like that. We are heading, folks, not only towards a digital vaccine certificate. Bill Gates told us this. He said that we will not return to normal. The world will not return to normal as we know it until the entire world is vaccinated. And he envisions a digital vaccine certificate, which would either be on your phone or what, we're not sure yet. It could be embedded in you. That's what he's shooting for. And there's now a new program that was just announced by Gavi, the International Vaccine Alliance, in cooperation, joint venture with MasterCard and the Gates Foundation. Well, the Gavi is funded by the Gates Foundation to launch a experimental program in some Western African country. I don't remember the nation, but it was a Western nation, a Western African nation, and they are going to experiment with a program that converges an identification certificate with your proof of vaccine and your purchasing power, meaning a digital plastic card, like that's where MasterCard comes into it. And they are experimenting on poor Black Africans. And once they perfect it, you can guarantee it will be rolled out worldwide. And so this is scary stuff. It's not going to happen next month or even by the end of this year, but I do look for it within a year or two. So we have got to start preparing to go underground to get our goods and services. And that involves all the things we've talked about. Start now interviewing your doctors, your dentists, who is a farmer down the road that might sell you eggs. They have, maybe they don't even have a sign up eggs for sale, but they have chickens. And you could get to know them and ask if they would sell you eggs. Stuff like this is going to be invaluable when they do away with cash and roll out the digital vaccine certificates.
Leo, just really quick, I know Dick's on, we got to take a couple of questions as we're there.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're able to establish in the inland Northwest was exactly what you were saying, where we established a decent, it was a work in progress, but a decent supply chain line. Mm-hmm. Where we identified farmers, those who raise cattle, sheep, grain, where we can get those essential things if things were to collapse or if they were to shut down. Again, have we not said that? I think, and personally, my opinion is that if Trump gets reelected, that the left coast governors, the Northeast governors, I think they're going to declare an economic civil war. They're going to shut down interstate commerce in some of these states. That's my opinion. And so therefore, one of the reasons we're trying to identify sort of a corridor, Tennessee, Virginia, Georgia, Georgia has coastal areas. Virginia has coastal areas. Tennessee is landlocked, but you have Mississippi, Alabama, some of these places, is to be able to have access to the ports, access to supply chains. So that's an excellent point you're making, is that, again, I don't want to share too much stuff because we are online, but just to understand that that's part of the discussions that when we formed our committees, twice a year we would come together and delegates were sent and we would come together and discuss things. And one of the things we discussed is our preparation and what were things looking like in the supply line for XYZ, and also sharing skill sets where, hey, we need this done. We have so-and-so over here. We had a lot of great work on the communication side, particularly through ham radio. So for all those ham radio operators out there, we need you. We need you because
we
we're going
really
to
need you. Yeah.
Especially if they shut down the internet. You don't think it's going to happen?
Oh, yeah.
If they shut down the internet, we need to be able to have ability to communicate. So with that, thank you guys for letting me share just a little bit about what we shared. And I think that there is definitely enough of a fertile soil to see a movement for some of these sanctuary counties and for some of these groups to form and see where it takes us. Because if we do nothing, then we know, what is coming. What is coming may not be totally stopped, but we have to at least try to do something. So thank you guys, and I'll turn it back to Dick and Mary, unless Leo, you have anything else.
No, I really thank you, Shahram, for being on this evening and giving us your time, your valuable time. It's been a super informative webinar, I think. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Dick and Mary for questions.
We've got a few here. Let's see if we can get through these, and then we'll do some discussion between you and I, Dick, okay?
Sure.
We've got a couple people asking about what's going on with the coins and how they're hoarding coins, and is it because they're trying to track us by using, a cashless society?
It is definitely they say this is the politically correct exclamation, that the U.S. Mint has been cutting back on its hours due to the COVID crisis. And therefore, they have been running behind schedule in the minting of new coins. Now, if you believe that, you will really believe anything. Folks, this is the beginning of phasing out coins. And next, they will phase out the single dollar bills. And then you'll see fives start to disappear. And before you know it, it is going to be a cashless society. That's what I was talking about later with the merging of this cashless MasterCard system with the digital vaccine proof of ID that you've had your vaccine, and also your personal ID card. So it's being rolled out now in Africa. It's being tested on the poor blacks by the racist Bill Gates foundations and Gavi, founded by Bill Gates. He's one of the biggest racists you will find out there because he tests most of his poisonous vaccines on poor third worlders before he rolls them out for the US and Europe. It's just the way he likes to work. So yeah, do not believe the official. That's my explanation. If anyone else has an alternative explanation for the shortage of coins, I would like to hear it.
No, I don't think so. Let me ask Shahram. We've got an attendee asking about what was going on in Virginia in terms of the name of the group. They'd like to find out who the group was that brought you in there. And then I'm going to throw this other question in there for you to think about. What's the best way for people to approach their sheriff to start the conversation?
Well, the conference that we were having was called the Virginia Liberty Forum. And it was actually several groups that had come together. As I mentioned, there was just, some pastors there. There was the Citizens Alliance for the Second Amendment. There was the Institute on the Constitution. So there were several groups that had come together. They had invited me to come in and talk about making liberty great again. And so that was the group that brought it in. Now, the groups that I'm talking about were looking to form some of this other stuff. Those are not necessarily groups. They're just citizens. They're actually just citizens that want to come together, and they're just individuals. This is totally grassroots, and that's what it needs to be. Because again, no group can form this. Go ahead, Dick.
I just want to make the comment that people are listening. They're probably curious. I think there's a couple of indicators. If you live in an area where there's been some Second Amendment pushing and shoving, you may have a burgeoning opportunity to let Shahram know about it. If you have a group of people and there's a pastor that sounds like he might be a patriotic church pastor, etc., if you can see the indicators of the Bible Belt, let's say the Bible Belt and the Second Amendment, and you've got some activism in your state, even if you've been losing, that might be an indicator that you want to contact Shahram. Shahram, I'm going to ask you to give your email address again.
Yeah.
Because there's an energy, I think, that you saw over the weekend, which you'd like to recreate elsewhere. What would be your email for that?
Yeah, the email is info at tilproject.com. TIL for truth in, then the word project.com. So if you email me there, listen, if you can do some of the scouting locally, talk to some people, as Dick said, identify a location, a church, a pastor. If we can get there, we'll come. And if we can't get there physically, we can find some other way. But the fact is that there is a momentum And I 100% agree that I think some of the states, in fact, it's almost, if your state, you've been kind of abused. Now, I would say there's various degrees, you know, the left coast, Washington, Oregon, and California. Oh boy, it's really far gone. But I think some of the states like Virginia, where there's still a lot of conservative patriots there, this issue really stoked them up. But here's the interesting thing, again, when I go to California next weekend, Dick, the pastor who's invited me in has asked me to talk about this concept with their folks there. So even in a state like California, this may happen at a local level in one county where it could be formed, and people can come together and build that community.
I want to make a quick comment. Be very careful. Do work surreptitiously. Work with Shahram. Do not announce events. We've learned our lesson, Shahram, in Michigan. Do not announce what you're doing. Work through your network and just interact with Shahram very discreetly.
Yes, sir. And Mary, to your question about approaching your sheriff, I mean, Dick had the idea last time. I think it was a great idea. Start with the BLM question. I always encourage people, don't go alone. I think if you can get a handful of people, you know, at least go 2 people. Don't go alone, because you always want to have a witness. You always want to have a witness to the conversation. I think that's a good rule of thumb. The Bible teaches as well. But if you can get a handful of people, go and set up an appointment with your sheriff and say, you know, we're just concerned citizens in our area. We're concerned about our safety. We're concerned about, you know, whether, sheriff, you can protect us or not. And then the conversation, sheriff, where do you stand with Black Lives Matter? Are you supporting? Are you endorsing? Are you going to bow a knee? So that was Dick's idea, and I think it's a great idea. My question was also on the question of, if there are organized patriots in this area that are getting trained and are concerned about their safety and want to protect themselves, sheriff, are you in favor of that? Will you support that, or is that, or do you view that as a threat? And see the response. Then number 3, and I think, Dick, wasn't this your idea again? Ask them if they're willing to deputize citizens in the event of XYZ, like these riots, because the police are grossly understaffed and unmanned or outmanned. And then maybe the 4th thing would be, you know, what is your view on militias? So those are some of the questions. You should know, hopefully find out the political affiliation of your sheriff. Are they a Republican? Are they a Democrat? Who endorsed them, right? Look at their endorsements. So just do a little bit of homework, but I would say approach them carefully. Don't share information with them until you can discern that they are trustworthy. Oh, here's another question that we asked our sheriff. What is your view on federal funding? Are you really a department that wants a lot of federal funding, federal money, or do you believe in more local control and local power? Because if that sheriff is all about federal funding, I mean, Leo already explained to you what the feds look like, what the federal law enforcement look like. So if that sheriff is being trained, like in Spokane County, where I used to live, when our sheriff brought in the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, to train their deputies, that tells you everything you need to know. So there's just one example.
If they say that they accept federal grants to send their deputies to the FBI Academy for training, then that's a non-starter. That's a non-starter.
Non-starter, exactly. Okay. That's a big red flag. You know, immediately you want to put your guard up, because that means. So
should that be maybe one of the first questions then?
Sure, that's a great first question. You know, how does your department get funding? How do your deputies get trained? And what is your relationship to the federal government? Because given what we know, given what Leo has just pointed out, and what I think what all of my contacts who are either in the Bureau or Dick and Mary, we know many who are out of the Bureau, who are retired, are saying the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
It's a really not a great place for federal law enforcement. So,
And then, are you
yeah, go
finished?
ahead.
I was just gonna say, and then a question, obvious question would also be, will you enforce any unconstitutional
Oh, very good.
edicts? Yeah,
Very good.
laws
Because
or
that's the
edicts.
question. Very good. I forgot that. I had it in the PowerPoint. Ask them about nullification. Do they even know what nullification is? There's a
Right,
good question.
right.
Sheriff, are you aware of nullification? Maybe print something out and take it to them. Sheriff, do you know that you have the authority under the Constitution to nullify, to not enforce any unlawful law, mandate, edict, Supreme Court ruling, judge ruling, whatever, and see how they respond. Again, I think we've given you what is that now 7, 8 questions, Mary?
Excellent.
Right there. Someone
Yes.
put those together and make a questionnaire.
And you always want to, this is an old journalist trick here. You always want to ask the easiest questions first.
Good.
The easiest, most non-threatening questions come first, and you build from there to the more difficult, more touchy, shall we say,
Wisdom.
questions. Yeah.
That's wisdom.
Because you don't
Very
want to
good.
scare him off right at the beginning. You want
Yes.
to
Sheriff, how are you?
yeah, you want to establish a friendly rapport with him. Go in there. You don't want to act the least bit threatening. You start off with a few softball questions, and you lead up to maybe that one right there with, if our governor or our county commission were to pass a law or issue an executive order, will you enforce it if it is unconstitutional? That and maybe the militia question I would save for last.
All
That's
of
right.
them are excellent, excellent questions. And what I'm going to try and do is actually list them out when I post this. So the key part to all of this too is this is an election year and many sheriffs are getting reelected. So this is the perfect time to go in with all of those questions. So thank you. One last question.
And
then I'm
sorry,
gonna close up.
Mary, sorry, real quick.
Go ahead.
To your point about election year, know that they're being visited by the other side. So
Right.
if you don't visit them, even if they're wishy-washy, if you visit them, then know that they're not going to hear from our side. So just, right. I'm just throwing that in there.
That is a critical point. Yes.
Go ahead, Mary. Sorry.
That's okay. Last question. What are your thoughts on how all this relates to end times and how Christians should be handling / protecting their home and property?
Well, I actually addressed that in a little bit in my last article, where I talk about the scripture that in the last days Jesus said, I believe it, correct me if I'm wrong, Shahram, but I think it's in Matthew 24, where he said that the lawlessness and the violence will be so intense in the last days that the love of many will grow cold.
Right.
And so all this talk about protecting and, stocking up and having security, all of that is secondary to what? Your own soul. And, one of the reasons to stock up is not just to provide for your own family, but what if some other family, dirt poor, who never had any provisions to begin with, maybe they had minimum wage jobs, people don't like that, who make that kind of money, don't have any, they literally live paycheck to paycheck. And so when this hits, it is going to hit those people so hard. They are going to be dazed. They are going to be disoriented. They're going to come hungry. And we can help those people.
Yes.
And so, Shahram, you may want to we don't want to be stupid. If they come to your door with guns, that's a little different. But if they come to your door literally with nothing but the clothes on their backs and they have children in tow, we as Christians, we can't let our love grow cold and turn them away. And so that's my only comment.
No, that's excellent, Leo. And again, folks, from a practicality standpoint, when we form these committees, one of the things that's great about the committees is community. The whole point of it is a community of believers, community of patriots who, as Leo said, they exercise that they have a love of God and they want to have the true love of neighbor, not this fake, if I love my neighbor, I'm going to shove a mask on my face thing. So with that concept in hand, a lot of the discussion wasn't just about protecting your own home or your own food supply, but how to help others. And so I would say, Leo's exactly right. Matthew 24, Jesus was very clear about lawlessness and violence abounding, meaning that it's exponentially getting stronger. One of the things that I disagree with the comment that was made at the conference this weekend was that, oh, really, there's nothing new under the sun. What's happening now is the same that's happened before. Well, yes, these things, lawlessness has happened before, but the Bible tells very clearly that it's going to be abounding in the last days. Tell me that you have seen anything like what has happened in the last 5 months globally before. This is
it breaks out in different pockets, but not in a global scale.
Not in a global scale. You've seen the church shudder globally. That's not happened in the 2,000-year history of the church. In certain pockets, yes. In certain areas, yes. So I believe we're in the last days, but the Bible never tells us to retreat. The Bible says to occupy till the Lord returns. So when you occupy, that means you have to still live out your faith. You still have to go about working, living. Even the book of Jeremiah says that they were still in the place of living, and the prophet told them, God is saying, marry off your children, raise your children, grow your crops, take care of your herd, your sheep, meaning go about your business, live your life to the best of your ability. So we are not called to be escapists. We can't hide from the troubles of this world. We must face them head on and prepare. And therefore, even though these things have been prophesied and they're happening and they're coming to pass, and certainly I think that the digital identification that Leo's talking about, the mark, the ID 2020 and so forth and so on, these are all signs of the preparation down the road for the mark of the beast. Certainly I think that's happening. But please hear my heart that we got to be able to stand our ground. And here's one more thing I say, even though I believe there's a rising of this lawlessness and antichrist spirit, the bottom line is you and I cannot go along with it. We're not supposed to help it, aid it, can go faster. We're supposed to stand and resist it. Bible says resist the enemy, the devil, and he will flee. So we're supposed to resist it. And so what if, Mary and Dick, God wants to create pockets of resistance where we can actually come together and consolidate and stand our ground and see a semblance of liberty. Look, things will, realistically, things will probably never look the same again, but we can still have a semblance of that liberty versus being completely overrun. So I hope people are encouraged and not discouraged by this type of talk, because we're trying to prepare you to stand and not back down and not give in and not go along. It's time to obey God rather than man. And so I hope that from a prophetic standpoint, those you're telling you that, look, we'll be taken out of here before any of this stuff hits. I'm not sure that's what's going to happen. I really am not, folks. If we're all wrong and that happens, then amen, hallelujah, right? Amen, hallelujah. But we got to prepare as if we are going to go into turbulent times. And I always tell people in the committees, what have you lost by forming the committee? You've gained community, you've gained preparation, you've gained knowledge, you've gained security, you've gained how to be a better light and salt in your community. What have you lost?
Friendships. You've gained
friendships. Exactly. You lose nothing by doing the hard work, but if you don't do it, what have you lost? Everything. So I'll turn it back to you guys.
Okay, Mary, it's amazing what we have in front of us, Mary. We have two people. We have two American patriots. I want to just say, Leo Hohmann has written books. Leo Hohmann has been an author. I don't know anybody else who can connect a whole bunch of dots and write them in ways that are so clear and so compelling. Thank you, Leo. That's fantastic. I don't know another person like Shahram who has lived through a revolution, a Marxist Islamic movement revolution with his family, and has been a policeman. And oh, by the way, was a Muslim and is now a Christian pastor and ran for governor. Wait a minute. These two people are a gift to every one of us, and I want to commend them and just thank them so much for giving of themselves so much. So I'm going to ask a pragmatic question. I'm going to ask each of them to talk about a donate button where they can be supported because I think it's critically important. So let me throw the ball to you, Leo, and then maybe you can invite Shahram to comment on the donate button.
Sure. We all, I mean, I myself, uh, in my family is living completely on donations now. We're doing this full time because we believe the time is short. Um, and frankly, I'm at the point now where I'm unemployable in the mainstream. I worked for 30 years in the mainstream media. I've worked for, you know, the Thomas More Law Center for the last 8 or so months before I started this full time around the 1st of April. And you cannot get a job anymore in the mainstream media if you have spoken out on the things that I have spoken out on. So I depend on you guys, and you have sustained us so far. We don't have enough to say that, you know, we we couldn't qualify for a mortgage, say, because we don't have a steady enough income. But you have sustained us on a month-to-month basis, and I can only say thank you for that. And I trust that it will continue, even if it's on a week-to-week basis. I'm trusting God that you guys out there will, you know, throw $5, $10 a month at us. Some people prefer to make a one-time donation and maybe of a little more than that. Whatever you can do to help us is much appreciated. And the donate button is just go to leohohmann.com. It's usually after every article, and I think it's also on the side of the website. Thank you so much. And Shahram, take it from there.
Well, can I first of all say that I think Leo Hohmann is the epitome and the picture of true journalism. If we had 5 or 10 journalists like him in this country, we would have somewhat of an honest media. So thank you, Leo, for your sacrifice. By the way, this was a critical part of the pre-revolutionary movement, Leo, because the British owned the press back then, and the press was corrupt back then, and the committees of correspondence were critical in not only addressing grievances, but getting information out. They had many citizen journalists like yourself. So you are a critical piece of this. So please, folks, support Leo. And as far as for us, Dick, go to our website at tilproject.com. There is a donate button at the very top under the tabs there. If you want to donate, first of all, you can donate by, if there's any materials that you want, we have DVDs and booklets there that you can purchase and support the ministry with a donation. As Leo said, we also have a one-time option, and we have something called the Gideon Army. So if you want to support us on a monthly basis, we are have formed this Gideon Army, a small remnant that can do great things if God is behind us and ahead of us. So like Leo said, it's by faith. This is a faith journey. None of us have any guarantee of anything, but we operate because we believe that God is good, is loving, and he has called us to this. You know, we relocated our family to Tennessee for this very calling, because we felt God was saying it's time to consolidate. God was saying it's time to shake the dust off your feet in the area that we were in, and go to another place. So here we are, and I didn't quite think it'd work out this way, but this is the way it's worked out. So thank you guys for giving us the opportunity. And please also, Dick, can I quickly mention, you probably were going to mention it, so I'm not trying to steal your thunder, but I do also want to mention that next Thursday and Friday, we have 2 webinars. So if you go to our website, tilproject.com, there's the tab at the top, or even on the front page, I think one of the marquees says webinar. If you click on that, you can register for our Truth and Love Ministry webinars as well. And we're going to be doing Thursday, July 30th, Time to Obey God Rather Than Man, a talk that I gave at a church Sunday morning in Virginia. And then Friday, July 30th, I'll be giving the full presentation that I actually gave in Virginia about making liberty great again. So if you like some of what I shared tonight and you want others to watch it, please join us for those two webinars, the 30th and the 31st of July, by going to Truth and Love, the TILproject.com website.
Perfect.
Mary, I'd like you to talk about a donate button. By the way, Mary is an amazingly generous woman with her time. She spends so much time on this project and other projects. Mary, you've got a donate button in mind. I think you might want to talk about.
She has personally helped me, by the way, too. When I have technical problems, Mary is my go-to person. If it's a Facebook technical problem or a WordPress problem, she knows how to do miracles with this stuff. And she never, of course, charges you a dime. She is the most generous person, absolutely.
Stop, you're going to make me cry.
Amen.
Oh, there is a donate button on the United West, and the United West is doing some great work as well, and we hope everybody considers a donation to all of them. You know, America is so important, and that's what we all are fighting to save. So God bless America. Donate where you can, and we so appreciate everybody who's attending every one of our webinars, and we've gotten such great feedback on all of this. It's because of our attendees that we're able to continue to do this. So God bless everybody.
And then finally, let me just say Thursday night, we have another webinar. This Thursday, it would be the 23rd. We have Dr. Mark Christian at the 7 p.m. Eastern time. Please look into that. This is really interesting. Remember, Dr. Mark was born in Egypt and was actually an imam and is a Christian doing great work with Global Faith. So that's on Thursday, the 23rd. Next Monday, we have Christine Douglas Williams, our regular author with Jihad Watch and editor with Front Page Magazine, a wonderful collection of news analysis from around the world. You have been with us for such a long time and so retentive in your interests, and we appreciate that very, very much. Remember, this will be available at Sharia Crime Stoppers YouTube channel, as well as posted on United West. And that'll be relatively quickly. Please share this. This is the whole point. The things we talked about tonight are very, very specific to you personally, and that's the whole idea. It's time for us to take action. Please do that. Please continue to stay in touch with all of us. Have a good evening, and we'll see you soon. God bless you all. God bless America. Thanks to everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.